Hi, everyone. Thank you, Thomas, for putting this all together. I'm really excited to be here with you all. I am actually in New York City, where it is very rainy, but I'm excited to be here with you. We're going to have a pretty great discussion today about how to start thinking about adapting assessment in the age of AI. And so I know that we are feeling this very strongly as educators that there is going to be a need for us to start rethinking and reapproaching the way that we think about assessing students. We're going to really focus though on a like that idea of moving from challenge to opportunity. Like it's very, very important for us at AI for Education, my organization, to really start to think about what the opportunity is as much as so we won't really be talking about, catching kids cheating. More, we want to talk about how do we start to rethink the way that we assess young people. And so it's really nice to be with you all. I'm actually a former educator. So I started my career as an educator in New York City. I taught high school biology. I know we're English, we're mostly language professionals here, but I did teach biology. I have been in every kind of job in education. It's been quite funny. I really have done it all, including some work internationally. So I was running a company in Australia for a couple years during COVID. But now I started AI for Education just about 2 years ago when I realized very quickly that generative AI was going to be something that was going to really create this disruption in our schools. And I saw it very quickly and I realized, and we realized as an organization now that AI literacy, so actually learning about generative AI, about what it is, what it means, how it will impact our education system, but also starting to learn how to use the tools effectively, safely, and ethically is really important. And so that's how we started the work. And now we probably have trained more educators on generative AI, just about anyone in the country at least. And also we do some work internationally as well. So really excited to have you all here today. But we're going to talk about this. So first of all, I mean, there is a seismic shift. And in fact, we now have a calculator for the humanities, or I like to say we have an easy button for assessments that were traditional before. I mean, we now have tools that are able to do with what humans did, but not just what humans did, but even more and engagingly, very interesting how quickly it's adapting and changing, where we're starting to see something like, when ChatGPT was released in the end of 2022, how quickly it was able to do kind of an essay. But now it's able, if you use deep research, you can start to see how with just one or two prompts, you now have a full research paper that is you doing like a literature review, for example. And so I think that one of the reasons why you're here and the fact that we have more than 2,000 people with us today is that there has been this seismic shift. And this is really what I think has really been, something that has really created a lot of fear and uncertainty in our schools. I don't know if you've experienced it, and maybe you can drop in the chat. We would love you to kind of think about how generative AI, when ChatGPT was released, has impacted your organization or school. And I think that we know from our work that there is a lot of fear and uncertainty on both sides. Teachers and students are both at a place of not knowing exactly what to do next. And I think that that's just a really important moment for us. And I love that this is kicking off the full week. You have such a good slate of presentations, but I love that we're starting with assessment because I do feel like that is the major pain point that we're feeling right now. And so I just want to kind of establish that we've been here before. In fact, every single major technological advancement, some pundit somewhere has said that learning is done. We're talking the telegraph, we're talking the radio, we're talking even bicycles. Very funny, but essentially every major technological advancement or that really is going to transform our lives and society, there has been an understanding that it would shift how learning works. And so we've been here before. The ones that are most recent to us are the calculator, especially the graphing calculator that had memory. That at that time, it was really interesting. Math professors were actually picketing. They were picketing and they were protesting the graphing calculator. And so we've seen that has shifted the way that kids learn math and what they're expected to do, both within a classroom, but also within work. The next one is the internet. All of a sudden now we had access to not just an enormous amount of new information, but also global information and also crowdsourced information. No longer was the knowledge going to just be in books that were created by experts, but now they were people on the on the internet that had an idea or had an opinion. I'll say that. We had Wi-Fi as well and one-to-one devices, and so the idea that individuals will now have access to this knowledge base in a on-demand way and something that is so simple. And what we see though is that all of these shifts have actually shifted the way that we teach. They've also somewhat shifted the way we assess. But what I will say is we have been it's been pretty difficult to really move assessment structures. I know that Pearson has done work and a lot of organizations have done work, but it has been really interesting how a student writing a paper 100 years ago is not so different than a student writing a paper today outside of the outcomes. Like, what does the paper look like? How is it written? How is it cited, et cetera? And so I do think that that's really what we're going to focus on today is like, how can we start rethinking and adapting those assessment practices to be more, not just more responsive to generative AI, but to all the other like technological advances that we've seen that we haven't really shifted our practice to accommodate for. So I want to though, there is the elephant in the room. And if you have a different idiom, but we just see so much that this idea of AIs for cheating has really started to take up all the space. And I would say that for the last 2 years, this has really been what people have been talking about. So I do want to give you a study from the US. This is US based, but Stanford University out in California has been doing a cheating study for about a decade, where what they do is they look for, how high schoolers are behaving. And so they have this survey that asks students, not like, did you cheat this year? But they ask them, did you use someone else's notes? Did you look at someone's paper? Did you have someone help you write your paper, et cetera? So looking at actually the kind of behaviors of cheating. And what they found is they've done the study now 2 years. So in 2023, and we're waiting on the 2024 data, what they found is that very similarly to the years before generative AI, that 60 to 70% of all high school students show some kind of cheating behavior. And what they found is that has stuck the same even in 2023 when generative AI, that's the entirety of 2023, even with generative AI being a part of a student's toolkit potentially, like ChatGPT. And so I think this is where it really gets interesting is what we do see is number one is that students are cheating differently. So one of my favorite stories is we were talking to a school district where a student had been accused of AI cheating. And, the parents said, absolutely not. And they asked them, how do they know? And the response was, I helped them do their paper. So I will say that, there are lots of different types of cheating. Like some of them have been around, like your parents, or if you have you can go online and get someone to write your paper. But what we've seen is that number is kind of stuck the same. Kids are cheating differently. So there are ChatGPT, Quillbot, paraphrasing tools, et cetera, are being used to cheat now. But what's really interesting, though, is that what we're seeing, at least in the U.S., is that in public schools and in private and charter schools, what we actually do. So when it says private, that's slightly different in the U.S. But what we've seen is that there's been a doubling and or a tripling of the number of students that are cheating with AI. And so that doesn't mean that there are more students cheating. It just means that there are more students that were going to cheat now using new tools. So I do think that that's something important for us to recognize, that while the amount of it hasn't changed, it definitely, is pretty interesting to see that there is an increase. So I do think that's going to be, and you can see like there's lots of research that shows that people are searching for different search terms, where that's going to be. So I don't want to discount the fact that this is happening, but I do want to say, at least for now, this is mostly happening in those students that are already going to be academically dishonest. But what we want to talk about, and this is incredibly important, is that there are two things that we are seeing as a reaction to cheating that we don't believe are the full answer. And so I don't think that, the important thing here is that, there are lots of different ways we're going to approach this, and we're going to talk about different strategies. But I think we have to start with that there are two very common answers right now that we just think are not going to be fully fit for purpose. And the first one is a return to pencil and paper. It was really funny. We were doing a session on Friday at a university, and I asked who is now using blue books, which in the US are these like the way you used to do your essays and handwriting essays in person. And one professor raised his hand. But what we are seeing is that educators are now saying students cannot do any assessments or any writing outside of the classroom. And what happens is, I do think that there is a very important part of what we're going to talk about where student assessment being in person and live and potentially without any technology is going to be very important. But I do think as a all or nothing, it's quite difficult because first of all, there are a couple of things where students should be able to use to learn some digital skills. But it also can be really difficult. Your cognitive load, how hard it is to write under pressure can actually impact young people that even like writing. And so I think we have to be aware and also impact students with learning disabilities or with you all. I mean, how many students do you work with that come from language backgrounds outside of the native language of the organization you're working in? And so it is really important that while we do believe that there are opportunities to return to, not return, but to have assessments that happen in classroom, I do think as an all or nothing, it can be harmful. The second thing is, if you've never heard of an AI detector, but an AI detector is something where you can take a student's digital paper and you can run it through like something like Turnitin or GPT-0 or CopyLeaks, which will tell you with a degree of confidence how much of the paper has been written by AI. And I'm going to tell you, if you want to try a project, if you want to try this out, just go to ChatGPT or another generative AI chatbot and ask for an essay written in the voice of a ninth grader, for example, using common spelling mistakes and some slang, and then run that through an AI detector and just see how easy it is to fool. And so we do this in staff rooms where we give people 10 minutes only. You have 10 minutes to both create the assessment, create the essay, and then run it through an AI detector and see how easy it is to fool. And we have people that get to fully human generated, even though they didn't write anything in 10 minutes. So AI detectors can be very inaccurate. In fact, they really only catch bad AI cheating, where you see where a kid has, kept as an AI chatbot in their response or something along those lines. But it also can be biased, which is very important for this group, against non-native English speakers and potentially also students that have disabilities. And so I think it's just really, really important for us to recognize, well, you might think that someone has written with AI, but instead of just running it through an AI detector and failing a student, you really are going to have to take a step to actually talk to the student and understand. And so I just want to think that this is really, really important. And so Senka asked a question that some of the AI detectors are Turnitin, and maybe Thomas can put these in. CopyLeaks has one. Scribber, which is just, I'll drop this one in the chat. But none of them are tools that actually are going to be accurate. I see in the chat, there are other tools that are looking more at originality or authenticity that are kind of like, Google document track history, but on steroids. So there are new tools that are coming out, but we're talking specifically about a tool where you run a paper in, it tells you the percentage that is AI generated. So I just think that that's really important to recognize that that's not going to be something that we can just rely on like we have with plagiarism detectors, which do still work. So another thing is, I mean, can we all agree? I mean, you're my 2,500 best friends today, but can we all agree that students cheat for all kinds of reasons? And they don't always cheat because they want to get one over on us, or they're lazy, or it could be for all kinds of reasons. And here are some examples. And I think this is what we really want you to take home from this slide, is that when it comes to cheating, the context actually matters. Meaning that what happens when a student that has difficulty with numbers is using an AI-powered tool to help them compose an essay, meaning that they're using their voice to text. So they're actually speaking it instead of writing it, which is something that's really interesting, right? That it's still their words and it's still their ideas, but now it's being AI enabled, which I think is really interesting. And so we also have, a student using an AI powered assistant to proofread their assignment. Not every kid has a parent at home that can proofread. And with your students that have language backgrounds, it's even more important for them because they might be doing their absolute best and it's going to be very difficult. It could be that a student uses ChatGPT to help them organize their thinking into an outline, revising their paper with Google Gemini. Like there's just so many interesting pieces. And like what I want to say though is, and Marinella just said this in the chat. I don't think we're saying that these tools, these skills are not important, but I think that this is where it gets really interesting. Is that what are we truly assessing? Are we always assessing when we do a paper a student's ability to proofread? If we are, then we need to make sure we're grading that. And I think that that is really where it's important that we're starting to be very, very thoughtful about why we're doing, like, what are we truly assessing, and starting to recognize that in some cases, what we think we're assessing is actually not what we're truly assessing. And I think we're going to talk a lot about this, but what I just want us to kind of recognize here is that coming from, especially right now, coming from a place where you can talk to students about their approaches, that if a kid does use AI, you can actually have transparent conversations where you're getting to the root of the why. And then talking to students about if the answer is no, let's say for number 4 or 3, do you really want them to focus on organizing their ideas? Then you tell them that that is part of this process and you're going to create a space for them to learn as much as possible. But that's really what you're assessing. So we need to do that as a fully human generated moment. But if it's a much larger project where we already know that students can outline, then is it okay if a student asks for permission to use AI to help them in that step? I mean, I think that and actually discloses, it actually tell you how they used it. I think that that's the kind of conversation we want to be happening, then more than it's just like no AI, all AI. I think that there are places in between that we're going to have to start looking at. So the next piece we're going to talk about is like how we can start to think about moving from our traditional assessment right now, which are where that easy button, right, ability to hit to say, ChatGPT, please use this tool, right? Like do this thing for me. Is that I think it would be really interesting to start talking about like how we start moving from those traditional assessments to those that are more AI resistant or AI enabled, honestly. Are there, yeah, like to Malagra's point, there are always going to be advantages and disadvantages, but we have to be really intentional about it. So what I would first want to do, and then here's our little retirement party. And I will say, like, we're not trying we're trying to be a little bit silly, but the idea that traditional assessments that we often have been using for a really long time, the US had like the 5 paragraph essay, but we have research papers and book reports and spread like homework sheets, is that I do think that we have to start thinking about how are we going to create better measures of students learning, but not just learning, their future ready learning, knowing that they're going into a world in 5 years. Let's say that you have high school students, that's 5 years. That's when things are going to really start changing. So the idea of starting to think through, okay, let's move from have this retirement party for some of these. It doesn't mean that they all have to go away. We don't hate an essay. We actually like essays and think they can be very, very important. But what we might want to do is start rethinking the way these tools work, because number one is a lot of these tools, a lot of these assignments tend to really focus on lower order thinking skills. So recall, can you actually do this type of paper is almost more important than it is to actually the quality of the paper or the quality of the critical thinking or writing itself. The second is they are disconnected from the future of work. So everyone, I was a teacher, but I am now running a company. And I'm going to tell you right now, I have never been asked to write a book report or an essay. I have been asked to do research, but the research has been more applied. But so the idea that they're not really connected to how students are going to work in the world. And then also that last piece is really that they are pretty vulnerable to AI misuse right now. And I think that that's where we really want to start thinking about it. And I think that a lot of you are really getting to a place where you're thinking about this in a very, very nuanced way. And so what we're going to do is I want you to keep those thoughts because we're going to start talking about some of those opportunities. And so one of the things, and actually I think a couple people have already called this out in the chat, that we do need to start rethinking the way that we define some things. And I think this is really what gets really, really interesting here very quickly, is that we really haven't redefined assessment in years. And I think we know that there are different types of assessment that do better for students, but we haven't really changed too much. So the old definition has really been around measuring students' ability to do recall and or apply specific knowledge and skills acquired in a classroom, and that's often then applied in a classroom setting. So we do that through standardized tests or quizzes, essays, but we're really looking at like, can students take what they learned in class? And then at that moment in time, they could take that and then they can apply it. And so while there are definitely moments where that's important, what we believe very strongly will need to happen in the new definition is an ongoing process. And what you'll notice is it's not one outcome, it's not one essay or one test, but it's actually an ongoing process of evaluating students' conceptual understanding, meaning like, do they actually understand photosynthesis, for example? Not just the steps of photosynthesis and the formula, but like, what is the purpose of photosynthesis in the ecosystem and for balance and for our, the circle of life, if you like Lion King, but like actually the conceptual understanding and then demonstrating that through a variety of different types of tasks. And what we like about this is that they're applications. So how are you applying this into interesting different caveats? So that photosynthesis example again, instead of it just being a lab report or a test, it could be like, now create a campaign to improve people's understanding of why green spaces are important, where they have to be able to understand that photosynthesis and green spaces actually help with, oxygen and carbon dioxide being moved in and out, but they're doing it in a really interesting application, which would be more like what they would do in their lives. And I think that what's really nice about this is also, and we say durable skills, and I know that we're speaking to an audience across Europe. So what I would say when I say durable skills, we mean the skills that will last. So the ones that we talk about a lot are like critical thinking, evaluation, communication, collaboration, creativity. Those 21st century skills we believe are going to be even more important. And so by phasing those into the assessments themselves, we really have an opportunity to really prepare students for the world that is coming. And what we like to do is really this redefinition is going to allow us to both respond to the changing technology, but also really prepare students to be not just a part of the workforce, but to really have ownership and to be successful, which is what we try to do as educators, is to make sure our students are prepared for a happy life, right? And I think that's really, really important. So what we want to do, and remember, I think you'll have these slides. So if you want to come back to them, absolutely said. But we want to start thinking about, and this is where, so when you say AI resistant, I'm just going to say nothing is going, I hate to say this, everybody, but generative AI we are the worst it's ever going to be. Generative AI today is the worst it's ever going to be. It's very new. It's only going to get better. And so we can't really think about resistance as that, like it's going to stick, but it is something that we like to give you an anchor on, meaning that these are going to be less easy for someone to go to an AI system and have it do it for them fully. And so things about like what you should be thinking about if you're thinking about your own assessments or assignments, like thinking about your own assignments themselves is like, are you focusing only on the final product? Are students only being graded on that thing, meaning that test, that assignment, whatever that is? If that's the case, we really want you to start rethinking about like, could you actually unpick that or take it apart so that you have a focus on the process itself? So for example, where if it is an essay, you have the research side part of it has a actual grade. The outlining has a grade, or like is like that these are parts of the final grades, and that there are places in which we can really focus deeply on the parts of the process, and not just giving students 3 weeks to complete an essay and turn it in. How are we actually using those 3 weeks to build the students' competency, but also assess them in meaningful ways to ensure that they're getting the learning? Because the goal here, everybody, I have to say it, I'm going to guess that no one in this audience came into teaching to be an AI detector or a cheating detector, right? No one in here was like, I want to come into schools to be very, very focused on catching kids when they're being academically dishonest. What we want to do is we want to actually prepare students and teach them. And so what we're saying here is it's actually not about the final product all the time. It's actually more about the process, because how much of our work is actually about the process itself. And I think that that is really what we want to do, is we really want to be in a place where it's less about that essay, but the process of getting the essay. And we still want them to write a good essay, but think of all the amazing different skills we can really focus on. And so we also want to think about involving multiple rounds of feedback. And what's really cool here is I don't just mean you. I know peer feedback is so important. This is a real opportunity for getting kids involved, because feedback itself is a skill, everybody. Kids being able to identify what's actually important, actually presenting the feedback in a way that's helpful and constructive. Like, that's a pretty cool thing as well. I think the next one is about requiring self-assessment and reflection. I'm going to tell you right now, if a student has to submit an essay, and then as part of that essay, they need to do a 1-minute short video of what they learned in the process and their number one takeaway, even if they didn't write the paper, they still have to read it seriously to be able to do that. And so even adding a self-assessment or reflection component, I think, is really something that is really interesting, right? And we have it in our train the trainer right now. Like, I think that this is where it gets really interesting. So if they don't come to the live session, what we have them do is watch it and do a 1-minute video. And that 1-minute video is very hard for AI to do. And it requires them to do all that deep thinking and watching and then apply it. So I do think that that's a really awesome place. Also an important skill for the future. And then also, like, what are the novel applications that we can do? Like, what are the interesting ways that we can have students show their learning? And I think that that's where it gets really interesting. So the idea of AI resistance, someone asked in the chat, these examples, these are meaning that it's harder for a student to give a discussion. Like, a student would have to work so hard to come prepared for a classroom discussion with AI. Like, they would either have to have AI up and you would not notice it, or they'd have to pre-prepare. But the idea that these are going to be harder for AI to replace all that work for. So that could be in-class discussions. We love this as an opportunity. Debates. Oh my gosh. I mean, they can potentially you let them use AI to help them build their arguments. But in a debate, you're responding and listening to each other and having to create like these evidence-based approaches and responses. Like, that's really, really cool. Projects, like the projects themselves, it depends on how you support them. But if they're multi-step and they require multiple different types of actions, I think that is really important. You've got models where they actually kind of come up with a model of an ecosystem. So Michael, more like AI cheating resistant. Absolutely. We've got experiments, peer feedback and review, group work. Group work, I think, is a really interesting one. Oral exams, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but maybe there's a place where oral exams come back, where students are talking through their thinking. And I think that this is really where it goes well. And then that final piece is, how are someone actually supporting, like actually taking their own thoughts and then using that as part of their assignment? Meaning, like, you can write, if someone had written in the chat, like, you could have different formats, but one of the ways we would say is that maybe the students get to pick if you have this, generative AI can help you build better assignments as well, but students get to pick the angle they care the most about. And I think that this is where it gets really interesting, is that I think a lot of us have always wanted to have more authentic assessments, more assessments that students enjoy doing, or at least are engaged in, that do not feel like it's just all recall or high stakes, very high stress. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to lean into those. And I think that this is where it gets really interesting. So, and I love the chat, everybody. I think that this is really great that you all are really like engaging with each other. But I think that this is a process. And so I just want to say, before we move from like this example, is that there's no easy solution, but this is something that is part of a process. And so even if you make 1 or 2 steps from this conversation, you're really going to have some really like large opportunities. But you don't need to do all of it, but just think of it more as a journey than it is like this final destination. But I wanted to give you an example, because we had a couple of questions in the chat about this too, of like, this is vulnerable to AI cheating, and this is more resistant. So the idea of a written essay on a topic that you're studying, if you make it like that, if it's just You give them the paper, they give them the assignment discussion or directions, right? And then they have three weeks and they submit you a paper and that's their final thing. Like that's going to be very vulnerable to AI cheating. So AI resistance, meaning it harder to cheat, would be having first students actually participate in a whole class or small group discussion about a topic. And so it could be a book, it could be a research topic, it could be an argumentative topic. And then what they have to do is they then have to submit their essay is now a summary reflection, and they have to reference specific comments from their classmates and respond to them, which means that they had to be active listening, right? That instead of me just being there, I'm like, oh man, Maria had a great idea or Thomas had a great idea. Let me write that down. And maybe I have to go talk to them after to be like, is this what you said? Because then think about that durable skill of kids talking to each other and that way after. But here is where I think it's really interesting. And if you want to try this out, we have a whole prompt library. So we have a whole prompt library of prompts. And if you go to AI for Education, I'm just going to drop Thomas as well. We'll drop the URL. But if you go to aiforeducation.io, we have a prompt library. And this is one of the prompts we have where you convert an existing essay into this discussion-based essay instead. And so this is where I think it gets really interesting. And what you'll notice is if you haven't prompted before, this is a little bit of a different type of prompt because it's using best practices. But here's what we can do is all you'll need to do is take this prompt. Thank you, Thomas. Take this prompt and go to our prompt library. And what you're going to do, and actually, you know what? I'm going to show you guys just really quickly what this looks like. So I know that we have so many great people here, but I'm going to just show you all really fast. I'm going to stop sharing and share again. So hold on one second. So thanks everyone for being a part of this. Where's share? There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you to our prompt library. So our prompt library, let's see if I can pull it up. Yeah, let's do here. So what we have here is aiforeducation.io. And then we've got in our resource hub, we've got our prompt library. And I'll drop this into the chat as well for everybody if you want to follow. Oh, oh, Thomas already got it. He's amazing. So if you go to assessment, what you're going to notice is we have a whole bunch, but a lot of them are actually about what we're talking today. So we're going to talk about designing AI resistant assessments, but here's the one that I was just talking about. And so this is the prompt of converting an essay. And so all you would do is take this prompt, cut and paste it into, let's say, ChatGPT. And I'll just give you a really quick example. So I'm just going to go here. I'm using ChatGPT. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to drop this in. And this is an example, everybody. This is just an example. So the one that you'll see here, you would want to make it your own where you change out everything like this. You put your grade level and content area. But I just want to show you an example. And so I'm going to do is I'm going to hit go in ChatGPT. And here we go. Here's a redesigned authentic assessment for the Great Gatsby that blends collaboration, critical thinking, creativity. And so what we're going to have is, it's being very this very dramatic with everything coming up kind of slowly. But here we go. So here's assignment title, the Gatsby conversation. And of course you can give them, feedback on this, but what you'll see is that the objectives have changed just from the writing of this and then step-by-step instructions. And so we read your notes, here we go. So this is just for you all later. This is really what we want to have you start thinking about. And so all of this is going to be available to you both in the chat and then in the follow-up. So I'm just going to go back to the presentation. So here we go. Back to the presentation, share my screen. There we go. Everyone can see that. And so what we have here, though, is this is just an example of one example, but we're going to go even deeper, everybody. We're going to go even deeper because what we were focusing on these slides is how do we move away from students potentially using AI in ways we don't want them to use it. But the thing is, maybe you're more comfortable with the idea now, but maybe we actually do occasionally want students to be able to use AI because if they do, then they could be more prepared for the future, whatever it looks like. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to talk about a traditional assessment or assignment. And what we're going to do is I'm going to take you through how you can start to rethink what this could look like. And I get really excited about this because I think that this is some of the most important work that we are doing today, because I do think that this is where it gets really interesting. So a traditional assignment would be an argumentative essay. So, students are picking up, choose a debate topic, on technology, social media. And so this is pretty common, right? Should social media platforms be responsible for monitoring and regulating misinformation? Does this technology improve or hinder human relationships, et cetera? Should schools ban or integrate AI tools? I mean, like these are big conversations that you're probably having as adults. And what the idea is, you're writing an argumentative essay, clear stance, valid reasoning, et cetera. And here's what it looks like. And of course, it would be more robust and you would support students. But what we're going to suggest is like, so these are the essential skills. So what we're going to suggest is if you have a traditional assessment or assignment, thinking now about the opportunity to actually go to the skills itself. So in this case, the essential skills are formulating clear and focused points, arguments. We've got supporting claims with relevant, reliable evidence from multiple sources, critically evaluating and integrating opposing viewpoints, right? The ability to actually do that and not just talk from your own point of view, employing appropriate academic, being able to do this in an academic way and using discipline-specific terminology, and then also synthesizing research findings into well-structured conclusions. And what you'll notice is we actually use the IB diploma and the European Framework of Key Competencies, which is spelled wrong, but that's okay, to think about these essential skills. So these are standard aligned. So the thing is, though, is this now, if these are the essential skills, is there a way we could do this potentially better right now for students? And so what we're going to do is we're going to take you through. So just remember, this is the goal of rethinking an argumentative essay. Here are the reasons why. These are the core skills we want to be able to assess. But now, instead of it just being no AI or AI okay, that actually starting to think about a continuum potentially of like how much AI could be used, if not at all. And so the first is it's just an authentic assessment that has no AI, and that is totally okay. I want no one to leave here saying Amanda told me I have to use AI in every assessment, or students should always have it in every assignment. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that if you can start thinking about which of the assignments that you have today should remain GenAI free, those foundational skill building, those truly summative assessments, like whatever that is, I do want you to feel confident that we believe, and that would be something that could be in class, an oral exam, pen and paper, a lockdown browser, etc. But that is one. Two is a GenAI assisted assignment, meaning that students can use AI to help them that in tasks that are not related to them demonstrating mastery. So for the case of this one before, there's nothing in those skills about proofreading, going back to that statement. So could they use it for proofreading, as that is actually not a core school skill I'm using or we're actually going to be assessing. The next is GenAI augmented. What are some ways in which students can use AI in meaningful ways that are going to contribute to the content, meaning they're going to have multiple opportunities to use them, but always, always, always with oversight and with permission. So that would be number three. But then we want to do like, what happens when you give students, a pretty like blank check in terms of using generative AI? But what you do is this is where you actually up the expectations. So AI is used to produce like things that were previously too complex or too difficult or required too much, that we're actually raising our standards for what students should be able to demonstrate by giving them these tools. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through that argumentative essay. So go back to that thought process about the argumentative essay. And I'm going to start here with our AI free assignment. And I will say that when we say this, I really mean this is more than a traditional assignment. This will be more authentic. But a GenAI free assignment is going to be like, for the argumentative essay, is like, in this case, students could conduct research in class only on supervised devices, and that students are taking notes on a teacher-provided graphic organizer. So they're starting to do the research together. They then are going to have time to actually discuss their ideas for their essay with a partner in class before drafting. And some other people put some ideas in the chat for this. It could be a pre-write or a plan, etc. But what we're doing is we're actually giving students time to work across these different skill sets. One is research and organizing ideas. The second is actually starting to hear different viewpoints. And then students are then drafting or revising or editing in class on supervised devices, or and also potentially participating in those conferences where they're getting feedback from each other or the teacher. And I think that this is where it gets really interesting. And so it's still a traditional essay, but think about how rich now the different, like you can actually go to each part of this now and identify and connect every essential skill to a part of this. And also we, even though we don't see this here, is there also those durable skills, right? Communication, collaboration, etc. And I think that this is where it's really like important. And so I think this would be like that this is really going to be something that can be helpful. So that's our first. But then let's say that you do want to have like actually have students have a little bit of AI to help with. And so what we have here, and just so I know there are a lot of questions, everybody. We'll have like a bit of time with questions at the end, and also, we'll try to answer any major ones. But we're just going to keep rolling for the presentation, so keep putting them in the Q&A. But what we're going to see here is like then if this is our, if this was our AI free, this is our AI assisted, meaning it's helping students around what's not considered mastery. So in this case, students use GenAI for those tasks like brainstorming ideas or trapping grammar and spelling in final drafts, which are going to be important for them to be able to do on their own. But in this case, it's not what we are assessing. So the idea of helping out with that, the students can maintain a process journal documenting when and how GenAI tools are used. Okay, so I used ChatGPT because I got really stuck on this paragraph and I needed some brainstorming, or I just didn't feel confident in my, I'm translating, I didn't feel confident, etc. They're then using a final essay that's similar to what we had before, that's written in class on supervised devices, so similar to what we had. And then this is where it gets really interesting, is that students are both submitting not just their final essay, but also that process journal. And like, how interesting is that, right? Because then, right, then what we have is they're having to disclose and get comfortable being transparent about their process. And I think that that is really great. I know we haven't done this very often, but I think a process journal for writing, even before generative AI, is a really good idea, because you can actually start to navigate pretty quickly to what works or doesn't work for students by doing that. And so I think that this is where it gets really interesting. And then if we look at the augmented, remember, this is where we're starting to go above and beyond, is that students are actually now going to collaborate with GenAI throughout the writing process. So we already feel confident that they are able to do this on their own, but now let's really dig into what's possible. So students are going to now submit an essay where they can actually like annotate it, like, here's where I used everything, this is what I did. And then they're going to have to like submit a reflection component explaining their decision-making process and when and how they use GenAI tools. You know what? I actually found that I didn't like its tone, so I actually rewrote it, or I actually really liked doing it on my own first. But you know what? I really appreciated getting feedback, especially when I got stuck. And I think that this is where it really gets really interesting. And so someone has said in the chat, like the idea of zone of proximal development, you're giving them this type of assignment when they already know how to do all of these independent pieces. But now what you're really going to be able to focus on is the quality of the evidence, the quality of the expression. And also, this will be something, I think, if you want to think about what most people will be doing when they graduate college, it's going to live somewhere in this piece where it's that AI augmentation. In some cases, the next, but really, I think a lot of our work in the next 3 to 5 years in industry and career will be somewhere around here. And so then the next one is, this is where we get wild and crazy, everybody. This is where we're saying kids have already gotten all these skills, but now we're going to go crazy and see what's possible. So here we go, is that students like they submit a traditional essay, but now they're going to go even further, where they're going to like have to take that essay, and then they're going to have to engage in a debate with a chatbot and actually defend their position against AI generated counter arguments. Maybe they need to now create like a campaign. You've talked about like where they have to go out and actually like convince people that they were right, or the chatbot, or each other. They then can submit their chat history, and they can also analyze what worked or didn't work. Like, I mean, some of the really interesting stuff. So they build their essay, but now so much of their learning and expression of their learning is like, how like actually can they back it up? Let's go. Like, how can they back this up? And I think that this is where I start to get really, really interesting, because I think this is I want you to think even bigger. And when you think, let's say, empowered, instead of doing an essay, they have to create an entire social media campaign with the entire campaign and all of they have to have posts about their idea. And then they have to have at least 3 counter posts to arguments, where they have to have responses, and they have to do all of that instead of just doing the essay. I mean, this is where we talked about crazy, like Come on, what can't they do? We would never ask a student to do that instead of an essay. But if they have all the AI helping them, then we can raise our expectations and we can really dive into where are you going to do things that are never possible. Instead of just doing a presentation, they now have to do an entire, video plus presentation plus the ability to then be able to manage a classroom discussion. And I think this is really where I think it gets really, really interesting. And yeah, exactly. Like you have to let's get to a place where it gets really interesting. And to Tony's point about how's it square with academic integrity, if we know that they've had permission, they're using it within the bounds, they're being asked to submit their process journals and annotate, then that would, to me, you're giving them license to use it. If they are in that first space, then you know what? Then we're not asking them to use it. And then we have to make sure that they have the right conditions in place. And you know what? Will kids still cheat occasionally? Guys, yeah, we already know that kids are going to cheat. So this is not, unfortunately, going to be a silver bullet. But I'm telling you right now, a kid's going to be more engaged with one of these later versions and feel potentially more confident than just writing a traditional essay. And so the kind of key takeaways before we kind of move into the Q&A. So we'll have about 10 minutes for that because you guys have been so great, everybody. But I do think that this is where it gets really, really interesting. I think the first thing is that I'm sorry, everyone, but we're gonna have to change. I know it is so hard and you're so busy. And so I don't want anyone to feel like I don't understand that. We work with educators across the world. And I know I'm asking a lot, but I do think this is our forcing mechanism. Because the one thing I want to make sure that everyone recognizes is that we are going to have, I want to just, when you think about generative AI, I don't want you to think of like a device or an application. I want you to think of it more like electricity or the internet. Every single device you're going to have the next 5 years will have some kind of generative AI. You're going to not be like Alexa or Google Home or, every device will have it. And so I think the idea that we can somehow keep it aside, we just can't. And so we have to understand that. And then because of how easy it is, there are already AI systems today that can do everything that we ask students to do in K-12. It just can. And I hate to say it, but it's real. And it's only going to get better from here. That we have to start redefining these traditional concepts of cheating and assessment and assignments, just assignment creation into something that's going to be more future ready. The second thing is that the tools there's assignments that are very AI vulnerable or very vulnerable to AI cheating are going to be things that are going to have one product that is submitted, or maybe one or two. It's going to be something that happens primarily out of the classroom. And so what we want to think about is that those essays will need to be redefined. And that either the format has to change, meaning that essay now happens in class, or we're going to have to start changing what we expect students to do. But also, here's the thing, everyone. And I think that this is the idea of we can actually adapt what we do. We can actually not just adapt it, but hey, man, you know what's really awesome is you can be more creative than ever before with AI. And I think that this is where you yourself, and you saw our prompt library, this is where I think it gets really interesting. Let's say that you really want to take an assignment that you love, but you really don't understand how to do it. Put it into ChatGPT or Claude and get feedback on how you can actually make it more focused on communication or collaboration. And I think that that's where it gets, or instead of having one rubric, we now have a couple of the different stages or helping you create that process journal. But I think that really the sky is the limit here. And if you're teaching high school, I just think that there's a lot of opportunity to start infusing this work. And so when you want to think about your next steps before we move on to the questions, is that what we would suggest is starting to think through what you already have in terms of your assignments and think about what really is going to be very easy for students to use AI for, but also maybe is it really doing what you want it to do? Is it really getting to students' conceptual understanding, their ability to apply? I mean, that's the question. The second is can you think of ways to make this more AI resistant or harder to cheat on? So you can brainstorm, like I just said, but you can also work with each other. I would say maybe take one assignment for this semester, just one, and think about how you can actually either up the amount of AI with student AI literacy in place if it's going to be in high school, or starting to change the assessment to be just a little bit more resistant to AI cheating. And then also, this is where we just want you to embrace. I don't want you to embrace generative AI because honestly, there are lots of, you have to build your own AI literacy. That's really important. So I'm so glad you're here with me today. but you need to build your own AI literacy. But if you felt confident, I think this is where it really gets interesting, because then you can really start to think through, how are these opportunities? And we have seen some professors and some teachers who have really nailed it. They just really, kids are, you know what, I'll tell you right now, I debated someone on the morning news here in the US about should AI be banned. And you know what, using AI in meaningful ways can be just as difficult in terms of critical thinking as doing it on your own if you're doing it the right way. And so I do think, and with the right assignment. So I do think there's a lot of opportunities here. So I'm gonna leave this one up until we get to the last piece. So I'm gonna start answering a couple questions. Please, Thomas has put into the chat, you have to do your survey to get your feedback form. So please don't forget to do that. But I'm gonna go through, I'm not gonna be able to answer 36 questions, but I'm gonna pick some that I think are gonna be pretty appropriate. And I think that this is where it gets really interesting. So I'm going to start with the questions that we have around academic integrity itself. And so I'm going to suggest very strongly that the most important thing that you can do in terms of academic integrity is to have a policy or set of guidelines in place at your school level, but also within your classroom. And that every assignment that you have, especially in late middle school and high school, or if you're also working with adult learners or like college, is you should have, every assignment should have written on it your expectations about generative AI use. And what I'm going to say is, don't call it AI, because AI is everything. I mean, that's Google search. So you don't want to call it just AI, but say there's no generative AI use for this at all, including this, and this, or you can use generative AI for this one for this one piece, like proofreading, but you have to include your chat history and a process journal. And so, but that's where we really think it's really, really important, is that having those set of guidelines. And if you want to check it out, we do have some great stuff on our website. So make sure you look at our downloadable resources. We have some great like classroom decision tree and other things that could be helpful. And so that's guidelines, but not just guidelines writ large, but literally per assignment, I think is really important. The second one, everybody, I am so sorry that there is no AI detector that is fully reliable. It just isn't. And they are only going to get less reliable as the tools get better. So the thing is that generative AI does not work from a database. It's not static, stays the same like Wikipedia or online like websites. And so it means that generative AI, there's no way to like ensure that you can actually do that. And if you want to try this out on your own, go to ChatGPT, have it write you an essay, and then go to a new window and ask if it wrote it, and it will not know, because that's not how the tools work. So there's just you can use it potentially as a tool belt, like a tool in your tool belt, but you cannot rely on it. And I think this is really, really important. So also, we're not advocating for academic dishonesty. So I see a couple of that. Ginger has an interesting question about, will AI remain free? I actually think we're going to start to see generative AI. I think it's going to remain free, at least the foundation models and the work that, even organizations like Pearson are doing. Is I do think that because of competition, there will be access to these tools, and never before has there been access to such great technology for free. So I do think that that's something that we will most likely see going forward. For special students, special needs, I think this one's really interesting. I think that AI has always been assistive technology, meaning voice to text or text to voice, which has helped those with disabilities or are nonverbal, has been AI. And I think that there's so many great things. We have a webinar series on special education, and we have some special education prompts. So if you want to go deeper, Stefania, then please do that. And then I think we have time for just one more question, and then I'm gonna let you guys go back to your lovely lives. Okay, this is really interesting about critical thinking. And so we absolutely believe that if students start to give away all of their thinking to ChatGPT or to another AI tool, that it can impact students' learning. Absolutely. The same way that if a student was having someone else do all their papers, et cetera. So what we really, really, really want to make sure of, though, is that what we're doing is we are making sure that students have foundational skills like critical thinking, but then to make sure that they're ready for the future is that we can't ban them from using the tools fully in high school, because they're going to be expected. In fact, LinkedIn, which is I think most of us are on LinkedIn, if not, it's a place that has the most global jobs. Their number one skill on the rise of any skill that launched last week was AI literacy. AI literacy was the number one skill for a modern workforce. And so I think that this is where it gets really, really important that if we didn't allow students to learn how to use these tools in safe, responsible, and ethical ways, that also help with their own thinking, I think that we're really doing them a disservice. And so I think it's just very, very important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have our last slide. I think, Thomas, are you going to come back on or am I just going to end it? I think maybe I just end it, but if you want to, here's our last piece. Please, we're so glad to do this with Pearson. We have a whole bunch of stuff that's free on our website, like including webinars. So if there's anything that we could ever do for you all, we appreciate it. But just want to say thank you. And I just really appreciate how kind and lovely and thoughtful you all are in the chat with your questions. This is such an important topic. Anything you could take away from today, even if it's just one thing, and start applying it to your practice, that's enough. So I just want to say thank you, everyone. And I think we'll get you out on time.